Next people we've got in person, Minerals West Coast. Thank you, gentlemen. Patrick Phelps. Now, we have got 3 people listed after Minerals West Coast, but none have clocked in yet.
So we can
So we'll keep you posted with that, but this could be our last submission. Who knows? Welcome.
Good afternoon. Thanks for your time today. So in terms of why we're here is Minerals West Coast, a regional industry group representing the mining industry. I know that a lot of this is focusing on competition more towards the rural sector. As per Lawrence's question before, the mining industry, if you measure it in GDP, total number of employees, it doesn't look massive in the context of New Zealand's overall economy. But if you look at our goods export sectors, the combined sort of animal protein sector, or meat and dairy combined, that's about $30 billion plus worth of exports out of New Zealand. And all of the food production sectors in New Zealand, whether it's the dairy industry, whether it's the meat industry, whether it's the hothouse horticultural sector, which is to say growing tomatoes, capsicums, cucumbers, what have you, inside hothouses, more than 90% of the energy supply for those sectors comes from some mixture of natural gas or coal, with a far greater weighting towards natural gas in the North Island because we don't have reticulated gas supply in the South Island. And so, you know, you could argue that one wheel on a truck is not a very big part of a truck, but if you take that off, the thing's not going anywhere, right? And so the energy supply that powers those dairy factories, those freezing works, those hothouses, that makes everything else possible. Hell, make it even smaller and say, take the key out of your car, you've only taken a small part out of it, but you're still not going anywhere, right? And if I sort of, I'm not sure the last time many of you were in Hokitika, which is where I live, but if you're observant, you'll see milk tankers and stock trucks going back and forth from freezing works and dairy factories, and you'll also see coal trucks going back and forth as well. And that is the lifeblood of the economy. That's what sustains a lot of the GDP, a lot of the employment at a local level, and that's true throughout the country as well. So what's the relevance of that to this inquiry into banking competition? Well, over the last few years, banks have been in the habit of, for sustainability or climate change reasons, for want of a better word, debanking coal mining companies, some of whom have been customers for up to 40 years. So one particular industry operator, a coal miner, informed me that they'd been with Westpac for close to 40 years, received a letter, your business is no longer welcome. More recently, received a letter from BNZ saying that your business is no longer welcome, we'll be closing off capital and financing services to you shortly, and we won't even give you an EFTPOS card or a bank account come 2030. So what's going to happen? Are we going to have pillowcases stuffed with cash and shipping containers on mine sites so that people can pay their staff? What is actually the logical conclusion of that? And in terms of the ins and outs of banking policy, I don't pretend to be an expert on that. Do we need less regulation so that there's more competition, so that these coal miners can take their business elsewhere and possibly find other customers? Or given that for the sake of security and stability of the sector, banking is a highly regulated sector which perhaps does keep incumbents out and limit competition, do we need more regulation to ensure people's right to businesses? I mean, I'm actually torn on this, and I hope that between all of you, you'll figure something out. But, you know, if you could be operating any business, and if you decide a customer is no longer worth your while, should you be compelled or coerced to do business with them? Well, possibly not. But if you're a lawful operator that's just going about a legal business, should you not at least be allowed a bank account? You know, it seems like a pretty horrific thing to have cut off. If any of us were told you're not going to have a bank, you know, 5 years' time, goodbye to your mortgage, goodbye to being able to give your employer a bank account to have your pay to go into, that would be a pretty daunting thing to be looking down the barrel of. And this will actually disproportionately, I think, impact locally owned and operated coal mining companies because they don't have the same access to international capital as, say, you know, listed companies that might be operating with offshore access to finance and things like that. So I will leave my comments there, but happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.
Very good. We've got Mark Cameron and then we've got Andy
Always
Foster.
good to see you, Patrick. Keeping it succinct if we can, do you really think it's the role of banks to be the social indicator for where we as New Zealanders invest in our backyard? Really and truly, we've seen it up and down the country where banks, they say they're not debanking certain industry players, but the industry players are saying it's exceedingly hard to access capital for what I call social issues. Now, the real question is that the role of banks? Is that not the role of society more so, less so the banks? And how do we move forward as a country where we stop picking winners and losers on someone else's interpretation of what is a salient investment strategy.
Yeah, I'm hesitant to stick the boot in because bankers
No,
like...
I'll stick the boot.
Yeah, well...
You're here to speak the truth.
Yeah, well, it's... I don't think any of us would really like anyone rifling through our account statements, frankly. You know, that's not the role of the bank. If we're a good business and we've been compliant, we've paid our debts, etc., I think that's, you know, that's the role. And I think climate change is an issue. It's tragedy of the commons, like a lot of other environmental problems. We haven't found a way of solving it. But the rule book and the referee is Parliament and the elected representatives of the people, not, you know, banks that might be using their quote unquote sustainability policies for what could be little more than cynical marketing purposes, you know, and it is a bit galling where you've got, as Josie and Jeremy mentioned, a critical service. While most of us would have been sitting at home safely with cups of tea on Zoom calls during the COVID lockdowns, like nurses and supermarket workers, you would have had machinery operators out there uninterrupted every day producing coal, which has been produced in New Zealand for about 150, 160 years now.
Can I strike a parallel? Have you seen any commentary on the cement industry, sir, that parallels your concern? Where the cement industry has been asked to rebaseline its emissions profile, has done that, but based on the rebaseline, now becomes fiscally untenable in the eyes of the bank. That would then mean that they would be importing cement with a higher emission profile.
That's right.
Than the baseline version of making it here. Have you seen examples like that in other industries, including your own?
No, not really.
You work really hard to be good, and you still get arguably.
If you want people to keep failing, just keep shifting the goalposts. It's the easiest thing to do. And just as per your words on imports, there's the cost, there's the emissions increase from imports. But the other thing that I think is probably worth just having in the back of your minds is 6 or 7 years ago, a land war in Europe would have been unthinkable. 100%. So could there be a clash of great powers in the Pacific in the next 5, 10, 15 years? And if so, how secure would coal imports out of Indonesia be? Or would we benefit from having some residual domestic capacity, not just the coal itself in the ground, but also the capacity, the people, the machinery, the infrastructure to actually produce it? Yeah, so.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions, Andy?
Yeah.
Just to wrap it up. Both
yes,
things.
yeah, you heard the first part of the question. You heard the question that I asked before, just in terms of your knowledge of what happens in Australia, basically dealing with Australian banks, and whether they doesn't seem as though they apply the same rules to Australian coal mining production, which is what I would decide something between 100 and 200 times bigger than New Zealand. Does that seem fair and reasonable?
No, it doesn't. It actually sort of seems like they're basically sacrificing, you know, certain operators within New Zealand for certain marketing credentials here while still profiting off the same sector in Australia.
Yeah, no, thank you. And look, there's the other one actually comes from, it's just a quote, Mr. Chair, from somebody in another industry, which I've also referred to earlier. In this case, it was the sex industry, who said, rather than being treated as a luxury or a privilege, access to the global network of banking is an essential right that enables full participation in contemporary society. Does that apply equally to banking, to coal mining?
Yeah, I believe it does. Yeah, I mean, look, for any industry to operate, it needs access to some equation of land, labour and capital. If coal mining makes you uncomfortable as politicians because you don't want it to occur, just do the honest and courageous thing and just ban it, and we can have an honest conversation about that. But don't try and suffocate the industry by either directly or allowing banks to starve the industry of what it actually needs if it's going to continue to operate. So,
no, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good submission. Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Members, that ends the, and if there's any members of the public here or those that aren't related to this work of the committee, we'll just quickly go into private session.